Story 1. When an employee quits or is fired from a job and the company doesn't hire anyone new to replace them, it can be hard to recognize as a red flag at first. However, the temporary workload added to your responsibilities, which was left over after the person left, slowly becomes your new permanent workload without any changes to your pay or benefits to compensate for the additional tasks. The longer the position remains unfilled, the larger and more obvious the red flag becomes. Story 2. This is such a good question. Here are some thoughts. For context, I've started several companies, hired a lot of people, and consequently spend a lot of time thinking about how to develop positive cultures. The CEO or boss drives a conspicuously expensive car. I can elaborate on why this is a tell if anyone cares. If it's a private or family company, do a Google search for company name defendant and company name plaintiff. If the company has been sued or is in the habit of suing others, that can be a red flag. Although sometimes there are legitimate reasons for either, it's something worth paying attention to. If when you are asked to come in for an interview, you are not treated with total respect for your time, for example, if you find yourself waiting for extended periods for an interview because so-and-so is in a really important meeting. Similarly, if you are not offered at least water or coffee if you're in for several interviews. I once interviewed at a place for 7 straight hours with no break, no food, not even a glass of water. Fortunately, I wasn't offered the job as it was at Michael Milken's firm before he went to prison. If the company brings alcohol into the office for end-of-week sessions on a regular basis, I know they can be fun, but it's a stupendously bad idea for all kinds of reasons. If leadership hasn't figured that out, then I'd think twice before joining. If when you're visiting the company for the first time and you pass someone in a hallway, do they smile and acknowledge your presence with a nod or maybe a hello? Or do they ignore you? It's a small thing but very telling about the workplace culture. Similarly, do people seem healthy and energized or gray-faced and tired? Any bait and switch deviations from representations made during the recruiting process versus actual terms and conditions. If it's a job in a manufacturing or distribution facility, is it messy or tidy? Messy, cluttered facilities are indicative of poor management. Plus, they can be dangerous. As others have noted, any nonsense about, oh, people like to work late or stuff like that used as pressure to get you to put in extra hours. Lastly, pay attention to your gut feeling. If something feels off, it probably is. Edit. Thanks for all the nice comments, and for those who disagree, well, I'm just sharing my perspective. Here are my answers to a couple of follow-up questions regarding cars and beer. Regarding cars, there are obviously exceptions, but in my experience, leaders who are focused on the external indicators of their personal success will orient their behavior and decisions towards their own benefit versus benefiting the entire company and other employees. In more extreme cases, which unfortunately are not uncommon, these people tend towards the narcissistic personality type. This means they will tend to set their direct reports against each other rather than encouraging and fostering collaboration and display other behaviors that make for a miserable workplace. I know, kind of a big leap from a fancy car, but I've been at this for almost 40 years and it's amazing how patterns tend to repeat. For clarity, I'm really talking about conspicuously expensive, not a nice Mercedes or whatever, but a Bentley, Ferrari, that sort of thing. Regarding alcohol, as someone noted elsewhere, sometimes these can be good, useful, and fun. In fact, they start that way when companies are small, and I used to do them regularly. But here's why I stopped doing them. In a group of 100, actually a lot less than that, you're going to have some folks with alcohol management issues. So you're creating a company-sponsored regular event in which they have the choice of either not participating and thereby missing out on the networking, or being in an environment where everyone is drinking. For those who haven't figured out they have an alcohol problem, you're basically helping them pre-game for the evening. I've seen people knock back 3 beers in 20 minutes and then realize they will be driving home. Is it my responsibility to ensure they don't drink too much? No. But is it a good idea for me to enable it? And finally, for those who think I'm a prude or whatever, if it's your company, you regularly provide alcohol at company events. Everyone knows old Bill often hits it a bit hard before heading home, and Bill happens to kill someone on his drive, you are completely, utterly in trouble. Quite aside from the whole "gee, am I partly responsible for what happened" guilt thing, the family of the person killed will get a contingent litigator and they will come after you for literally everything you have, easily $20 million or more per person. Story 3. Having to take an online intelligence quotient test before even being considered for an interview. Backstory. When I moved to Australia, I was looking for work as a language teacher. I went on monster.com and found an advertisement saying that they were looking for teachers for gifted children, but that I needed to take an online intelligence quotient test to apply and needed a score above 125 to go for an interview. I took the test, sent in my curriculum vitae and cover letter, and waited. An hour later, I got an email asking to meet at a special cafe in downtown Melbourne the following day. So, I went and noticed that this building was a Freemason building and that one needed a special pass to get in. There was a little older lady waiting for me in a tacky floral print shirt and a white fisherman's hat. Immediately, she pardoned herself for wearing that hat, explaining that it was lined with aluminum to protect her from the cell phone radiation. I thought nothing of it and ordered a coffee. Right off the bat, the old lady told me about how she has an intelligence quotient of 160 and the rarest blood type, similar to that of Tutankhamun. She went on and on about this for a while and then began explaining the job. She told me that in the beginning, I wouldn't be teaching but administering tests in schools around Queensland to recruit children to special camps, where then I would be teaching. The whole thing screamed red flags, but I politely listened and got her business card in case I had further questions. I got a proposal on the spot. I looked at the card and it said, "The Wise Ones." After looking it up, I noticed that it was a cult similar to that of Universal Medicine. Story 4. Anything that the manager says in the interview that doesn't line up with the job description. Yes, we posted it as a manager-level position, but this is actually a coordinator role. Yes, the description says travel is 25%, but it might be closer to 50%. It just depends. We did post it as a remote job, but we prefer people to be in the office several days a week. Yes, we phrased it that way in the job description because corporate says we have to. All of those are red flags. Anything a company is vague about should be a red flag. Story 5. I know people rightfully like to hate on human resources, but if a company brags about not having a human resources department to deal with, expect them to be very disorganized at a minimum. Story 6. Interviewed with a regional vice president of a billion-dollar company for a sales role. When I asked if the position was a backfill or open due to growth, he stated it was a backfill. I asked if the person was promoted or moved to a new role, and his response was, "We have had more people quit in 2021 than ever, and it's because they can't handle the pressure." Needless to say, I declined the next step in the hiring process. Story 7. Trying to rush a decision out of you once the offer is made. I once interviewed with a company where I would have been relocating across the country to work for them. There were 3 rounds of interviews, and they left me completely in the dark for weeks on end between each round before inviting me to the next round within just a few days of when the interview would take place. After the final interview, it was over a month of silence from them until they made an offer but told me I had less than 24 hours to let them know my decision. I would have been moving 2,000 miles away from home to a place I had never been or even seen before, as interviews were completely virtual. They wanted me to start 6 days after the offer had been made. When I asked if there was any flexibility for me to have more time to think it over or have more time to move out there, they said no. They needed the decision the next day, and if I accepted, I would be starting in less than a week. I declined the offer. Story 8. I always ask the question, why is this role open? Is it a new role? Or am I replacing someone? Why did that person leave? This really helps you see their reaction, and if they look nervous, it's because the person who left did so because they were not happy. I also like asking how experienced my team members are. If there's no one there for more than 2 years, I would also be concerned. Final question, as I work in sales, I always ask, what are the key performance indicators? And how many are actually hitting their quarterly and annual targets? This also reveals if they set their targets too high, and you can expect to enter a grim working culture where you're never good enough and can always do better. Last one, I like asking about how they are working to establish a team culture as well, since this will tell you a lot if people at work are friends or just there to do their job. Story 9. If you are being interviewed or hired and they tell you that you will have multiple managers to report to, it means there is not a clear chain of command. Eventually, one manager's directions, goals, or instructions will conflict with the others, and you will get caught in the middle. One or both may use it against you in performance reviews. Story 10. The sink or swim technique. It was my first day as a cashier. I received a couple of hours of training, then I was by myself and we were not busy. All of a sudden, a rush of customers came in, and I was asking for help. The manager said, "Sink or swim, we're busy back here. Figure it out." I did manage, but let me tell you, the customers were not happy because I still didn't know how to properly enter orders, especially modifications. Story 11. Asking if you are somebody who's willing to put in the time to make sure deadlines are met and work is done, or if you're the type of person who leaves when the workday is finished. This is generally corporate speak for we will be forcing you to work unpaid overtime. Story 12. I interviewed once at a very huge organization that had a site in the town I was living in, and these guys were so proud of the new top-of-the-line facilities. When they took me on a tour, they pointed out the lovely Zen garden area that was made for employees to go unwind and clear their heads. The problem with it was that this area was positioned directly across from all the higher-ups' offices. Yeah. No. Story 13. When they refuse to tell you what your starting salary would be, or when they just avoid the question altogether. Like I didn't apply to the job to be a part of some family work culture. I came here to get a job and be paid. Story 14. If many provisions in company policy say, except for employees in Colorado and California. Colorado and California have multiple statutes that are more employee-friendly than the other 48 states. So the company policy is basically saying, we'll do X for employees where the state makes us, but neglect the rest of you. Story 15. Anytime they are being sketchy, not being specific, or giving you the runaround regarding basic questions you'd ask them, like expected work hours, pay, and benefits. Story 16. I went on an interview. They had me wait in the lobby. In the 5 minutes I was sitting there, 3 employees walked past me separately at different times. The first just looked at me and laughed. The second said, "Leave. Leave while you can." The third made the sign of the cross at me. Later, during the interview, the hiring manager showed me the Zen room, which was a quiet room you could go to for 10 minutes when you got too stressed out. You had to ask permission to use the Zen room. I was offered the job. I declined. Story 17. If you get a tour and everything is old, but they say they are in the process of updating, no, they do not update anything. You are going to be working with outdated equipment. 90% of the time, you are going to get in trouble when it breaks on you. Story 18. When they say or try to make you sign anything pertaining to not discussing your wages with other employees, that is illegal and it screams that people are not being fairly compensated for their work. I have literally up and walked out of jobs for this. Story 19. Any job advertisement that doesn't mention the name of the company should raise suspicions, especially if it's related to sales. I was tricked by that once. I turned up to the interview, and the job was going door-to-door selling vacuums for Kirby Vacuums. Story 20. Had an interview somewhere, they offered a starting salary of $20 to $23. Being new in this field, when they asked how much I was expecting to be paid, I said, well, you are offering $20 to $23 starting, and being new in the field, I think $20 would be good. Their response was, oh, well, that's kind of a red flag for us. Usually, when someone starts with us, they'll say, I'll take $17 until I can prove to you that I'm worth the $20. So you'll see why we're hesitant. My response was, then why would you offer $20 at your low end? I didn't get a call back. Story 21. From personal experience coming out of college with a mechanical engineering degree, this was a series of red flags. This was my second real engineering job interview, so I told myself to see it through because I needed the interviewing experience, and they reached out to me for an entry-level design engineering position. They made me wait for 15 minutes in an unheated breezeway in the middle of winter. A receptionist came out 5 minutes into my wait in the cold and asked if I would need to give a 2-week notice to my current job or if I could start that week. I gave a non-answer, thinking it was my invitation in, but she said the person was not ready yet, and I had to keep waiting. When I was finally greeted by the manager I would work under, he was new to the company, 2 months at the time. He made sure I knew that. They first asked a standard, tell me about yourself, then pivoted to pay, saying, look, I understand what you might expect in terms of compensation, but please hear us out before you make your decision. It was strange since I had not mentioned compensation in my introduction. We did a quick tour, and by quick, I mean 2 minutes. No workers looked up from their areas as we passed through, and it was so silent you could hear a pin drop. Next, the place was old. Inside the work area, everything looked like it was from the 1980s. The manager casually mentioned, "When you first pull into the office, leave your cell phone in your car because having it go off at your desk is grounds for termination. If something is that important, give your family the number for the receptionist, and they can forward a call to you if you are not busy. Anyway, follow me. The owner wants to meet with you." The owner was in his 70s and the son of the company's founder. This personal story was nice, but after the introductory conversation with no technical questions, he slid a folder across the table and said, "Quit your job today, start tomorrow, and I'll give you $2,000. Inside was a breakdown of their policies. 2 highlights. Doctor's visits and funerals are unexcused absences unless you use vacation time, and you are not allowed to be more than 15 minutes late twice in a calendar year, or you are subject to termination. The salary amount was blank, so I asked about it." He stared down the manager, who looked like he had seen a ghost at this point, and asked, "What do you think is fair?" I asked for market rate pay given my education and the position, and they countered with a significantly lower number, more than $25,000 per year less than my market value request, saying, "We are glad to pay you that amount at a later date, but you need to go through training and onboarding. While doing that, you aren't actually doing all the responsibilities of this role, and onboarding takes 6 months, so we can negotiate a more reasonable salary then. But for now, this is our offer." I said I understand there are costs for training, but what does that entail to justify the pay? He said to learn the company, you need to start from the bottom. Your first 6 months you'll be in the warehouse loading and unloading products from semi-trailers. I thought he was joking, but he was not. I immediately said thank you, I need to think this over, and walked to the door. The owner half-blocked the door and said, "If you leave now, you're ruining your future. You don't understand. This opportunity will set you up for life if you're willing to make sacrifices." I said I'd call tomorrow and left. This entire process lasted 45 minutes on a first interview. I got home and found an email from the owner saying, "How dare you leave the interview? If you had any level of experience, we'd start you closer to your desired pay. You're making the worst decision of your life by not taking this job." I got a phone call about an hour later from the manager saying, "Look, I understand you may have reservations, but if you come in tomorrow, I can give you another $500. I hung up, and that was that. This place tried to get me, a recent engineering graduate, to take a warehouse job pitched as a training program to become an engineer at nearly half the market rate for an engineer out of college. They said they'd fire you for having a cell phone in the building and that, heaven forbid, you have to attend a funeral, you would need to use a vacation day. So what is a red flag you might not realize? Literally anything I just said.